All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. A little bit of a slow news day yesterday on Sunday. Cowboys trying to finalize their final 53, trying to make some moves, trying to figure out who's going to make this roster and who's not. A little bit of news dripping here, which we'll get to in just a little bit, but I think a lot of it, at least to this point, has been pretty close to the chest for the Dallas Cowboys. But let's look at the data when it comes to the preseason as a whole. We've gone by game after each game and talked about players and positions, but let's take a step back and look at the data in terms of the entire 3-game set to see who stood out and just some sort of trends. So let's go ahead and jump into it here. This is going to be the defensive PFF grades, the top 25 PFF grades over the entire preseason, just ranked top to bottom regardless of position. You can see Andrew Booth at the top. A pick six will certainly help that. Sanborn in one game. Jack Sanborn, the linebacker, did well. Troy Pride Jr., that's a name, right? He played a lot, played in all 3 preseason games. He graded out very highly. My boy, Shamar James. I tell you what, guys, I've been saying he's a star, and he looks it. Film, production, broadcast, and analytics here, courtesy of PFF. He's absolutely crushing it there. Zion Childress, there you go. I tell you what, you look at the top 5, and that's really all you need to know. Right, Andrew Booth, pick 6, so you take that with a grain of salt. Sanborn, listen, he's as advertised, a good stabilizing linebacker. But the next 3, Pride, Shamar James, Zion Childress, you want to know who your sort of backup DBs are going to be as they work through the injury September, and we'll get to some updates on that. You want to see which rookie on defense is really standing out. That's what you want to see right there. Childress, Shamar James doing their best. Ernest Brown the fourth with a solid 2-game set. Nealon didn't play too much, but he graded fine. Keeman Hall, I think Keeman Hall makes this roster. I think he's a good tackler, right? I think he's average in coverage. He does have some interceptions in his career in the preseason, but he's a good tackler. And for that, I feel like if it works out, you keep him on the roster. But, I think Pride has proved it in coverage. So it kind of depends where you want to go. I think, to me, you keep Pride, cut Keeman Hall, and keep Zion Childress. But that's where I currently stand on that. Justin Barron, young linebacker, again, linebacker core. You can see Maris Leofau right next to him, doing a lot of really good things with Eberflus defense. And you have Israel Mukuamu, who's, a lot of his 3-game performance, his grade is based off of that really spectacular interception he had. But overall, it was okay. Nothing spectacular outside that one play. Tyrus Wheat, mixed bag. OJ Media, just 1 game. It was solid. Harmon, Houston was really good and really productive. His grade get kind of weighed down a little bit, but I think he picked up as the preseason went on. Kyrie Elam didn't really play that much, just a couple snaps. So that's kind of a tough weighting there, but I think he's fine. The Cowboys coaching staff is high on him. Again, being Diggs' replacement for week 1 or however long it needs to be. You see Damon Clark, if I can pronounce his name, and Donovan Ezeraku, try to combine them there for you guys. Right there at 19, tied at 19. I mean, you got to take that with a grain of salt. I think there was a couple ugly games there defensively. I look at the Rams to start as a good example, but I think they both had good preseason, specifically Ezeraku. They're high on him, again, strictly as an edge rusher to start the season. And from there, you can see the final 25 before you get to Mazi Smith at 42.6. So we'll get back to Mazi Smith in here in just a second. But I think the big takeaways here is that Shamar James was really good. Zion Childress backed it up, the training camp hype with really good preseason production. You look at a guy like Troy Pride Jr. and Keeman Hall both did well. It just is going to depend on if they have to pick one or the other. What do they value more? Pride Jr.'s theoretically good, better coverage, and Keeman Hall's theoretically better run defense and tackling. So I think that's what's going to come down to between those 2 players. Something to keep an eye on there. Let's go to the offense, right? So let's look at the best graded offensive players. We're looking at TJ Bass, who had a really great final preseason game, really bumped his numbers there. Princeton Fant, really good player. We talk about really good run blocker. Did a lot of good things just for the Cowboys in general. They're very high on him. The question is, will he make it? There's so many good tight ends on the roster. It's hard to see. Malik Davis, again, veteran, which you'd expect, coming in off the bench, providing a lot of value. I don't know if he makes his final 53. We'll have to see. Look, Ryan Flournoy, again, he just is a good preseason guy. I think we wanted to see more out of Trayshawn Holden. He's 21st on here. I think Flournoy beats it over Holden, to be totally honest. You have Christian, the offensive tackle, doing some good things to finish out the preseason, making that kind of interesting. Maybe a practice squad guy. Deuce Vaughn, I tell you what, Deuce Vaughn's a preseason warrior there. Not nearly as good this year as it was last year. But again, I think he's a practice squad guy if you have like Phil Maffa on the final 53. But obviously, if you look at, Blue, Sanders, and Javonte Williams being your 3 running backs, right? There's no room for anyone else, and I don't want Deuce Vaughn to take a 53-man roster spot. I think he's the quintessential practice squad player. I talked a lot about that yesterday, but guy who can do a lot of different things, right? run the football, inside zone, outside zone, catch the ball, return kicks, right? Willing pass blocker. He's not good at really anything, but he's solid at enough, and he's a good team guy. To me, he's a perfect like crisis player that if an injury happens or a couple injuries happen and you want to slide him into a game and you're nervous bringing a rookie in or bringing a guy off the street, Vaughn could certainly fill there. Tight ends continue to do well. Nate Thomas filling in for Guyton, getting some experience potentially for week 1. Top 10 player there, so that's solid. Booker only had 1 game, but he was solid. Phil Maffa, highest rated running back right there, or I'm sorry, second highest rated running back behind Malik Davis. But I think Maffa had a pretty good preseason. He finished 12th in the overall team, better than Jalen Brooks, better than Miles Sanders. Cooper Beebe with only 1 game. Johnny Cornelius, a tackle, had a solid preseason as a rookie. I think he exceeded some expectations there. You work down the list there. Trayshawn Holden at 21st. Kind of a disappointing preseason. I mean, after the Rams game, people said, okay, he's finally figuring it out, finally stepping up. And not that it's all his fault. Obviously, quarterback issues certainly hurt his ability to make plays. But the fact of the matter is, there was sort of a disconnect between what he did in practice and what he did in preseason. And he had some good practice moments, not nearly as many good preseason moments. And he had some mistakes, penalties, drops. That'll be a real question. I personally think Flournoy and Brooks over Holden, but we'll have to see how it all shakes out. That can go a bunch of different directions. And Jaden Blue in his only preseason game, 24th out of 25 there. So big takeaways. Curious what you guys think about this. I think Nate Thomas, the tackle filling in for Guyton, did solid. Got a lot of good experience. That was good. Phil Maffa, again, I think there's a lot of people, and we'll get to the running back position here in a second. A lot of people have been saying, listen, look for Phil Maffa. And I said, I don't know, but looking at the data, it makes sense. I mean, he's better than a lot of good football players on this list. So that's something to keep an eye on. And I think, how about Flournoy, making a name for himself yet again in the preseason. I feel like he makes this roster. All right, let's get into the nitty gritty here. This is the run defense grades for top front 7 defenders. There's my boy Shamar James doing well. Justin Barrett, Leofau, Sanborn, Clark. You can see the linebackers there filling out the rest of the chart there. It's hard to tell because some of these linebackers, like Leofau, only he played 20 snaps. Sanborn only played 10, so it's a small sample size. But Shamar James, 64 snaps and led the team in run defense grade. I know the competition's up for debate, but I thought he did very well. I'm certainly not alone in that regard. When you look at edge players defending the run, it's hard to tell because you guys like Williams and Nealand only played 7 snaps combined in 1 game against the Ravens, but not a lot of really good stuff there. But if you're a pass rusher like Ezeraku, it's sort of like, hey, listen, there's going to be some lumps. He'll figure it out as we go. But I would talk about the bottom there, the interior defensive lineman. I think this is where it gets very interesting. And this is, I think, Mazi Smith's best case, right? Because if you look at these grades, Toya, 27.6. Perrion Winfrey, 38. Denzel Jackson, 25.1. And then Mazi Smith, 46. Right? Mazi Smith, at times, was not very good in the run, but he was certainly better at getting per PFF exclusively here than all of these guys, right? And I thought Mazi Smith really improved by the final preseason game, finished strong. I don't think he's had a good camp. I don't think he's had a good preseason. But if you want to make an argument in terms of overall, right? He's had his moments, of course. But if we want to make an argument of why he should still be on the roster, this is it. It's that he's just better than the other guys, right? I like Perrion Winfrey. I think he's a disruptive force, but snap in and snap out, he's very inconsistent. He's not, as the data points out, he'll have 2 good plays followed by 4 bad plays, right? That's sort of how he plays the game. You look at Toya, he's flashes, but rookie, late rounder, it's going to be tough to see what he can do during the regular season. I think Mazi Smith makes the roster here just based on this data alone. I really do, right? I was against him making the roster. I said, listen, you almost have to cut him. But if this data right here is indicative of the performance of the interior defensive line play in general, then that's obviously not good. And we've talked about this position being very bad for Dallas. But I think it's important that if Mazi Smith is still the best of the bunch, you got to play him, right? Whoever the best is, even if Mazi Smith's career isn't working out and maybe cutting him would be the right move to make to give someone else an opportunity, if he still is the best of the bunch, then you have to keep him. You got to play the best players, right? Culturally, that's what you need. If you don't play the best players, everyone in the locker room will notice that, right? I truly believe that if you sit there and say, well, he's a bust or whatever, and we're going to cut him, people in the locker room, the players will say, okay, this isn't a meritocracy. This is a favoritism, right? Whoever the coaches think is a favorite, they'll play or keep or cut or not cut. You got to play. You got to keep the best players. And if this is remotely close to what we're seeing in terms of production during practice, this data right here when it comes to interior defensive linemen, you got to keep Mazi Smith. You just have to, just because it's a bad bunch, but he's the best of the bad bunch. All right, which was, it surprised me when I look at this. I was very surprised to look at these numbers and see him like that. But I guess, again, I thought Mazi Smith didn't play great. 46.0 isn't that great, but, the rest of the guys are worse. That means you got to play them or keep them at least. All right, let's talk about coverage grade here. So we're looking at coverage by cornerback. That was a big competition here, of course. Looking at different coverage grades, you can see it on the screen here. This is just the position. It's not in any sort of sequential order. You can see Troy Pride Jr. with the 77, really good there. Keeman Hall again, 68-1, not as good as Troy Pride Jr., but he's a much better tackler. So this is where that competition gets interesting. Do you take Troy Pride Jr.'s coverage, right? Let's call it an A, but he's a C tackler, and you take Hall's B coverage and he's an A tackler. Like, how do you weight that? And I think that's going to be a very tough decision for the Dallas Cowboys. Andrew Booth heavily weighted in the positive because of a pick six. We've seen a lot of Andrew Booth during the regular season. I'm not going to fall for that number. You get an interception return for a touchdown. PFF will jack up your grades. Again, Elam only played 7 snaps, so you can't really evaluate anything there. I think Harmon, I think Rochelle, I think OJ Moody, I think they were, okay in what the snaps they got, the plays they got. But I think it came down to, or will come down to, Hall and Troy Pride Jr. here. And it just is going to focus on what the Cowboys want at that position and where they want to go. And obviously the final 53 can be moved and adjusted depending on how players perform. To me, I personally think you should keep Troy Pride Jr., at least have him higher up the depth chart, and then maybe move Bland inside in some certain situations. I mean, we're in an NFL world right now where there's a lot of great receivers that they line them up inside. They have people move in motion. It's not like even as it was during the Legion of Boom years, Seattle, and certainly before, where you just kind of had your best corners out wide and you just let it ride. I think you need to have really good corners on the inside, and if Troy Pride Jr. can cover and he can tackle good enough, I think it makes more sense to have him in that position. There's also a strong argument for having Keeman Hall in the slot in those certain coverage situations and then have Bland out wide. So it all depends on what you think is best in terms of the other players you have, and we'll get to more specifics on the cornerback position here in 1 second. But I think, in general, Troy Pride Jr. and Keeman Hall both did a good job, both made a name for themselves, made that position decision there very challenging for the Cowboys coaching staff. All right, let's get into the news. First report of cuts is courtesy of Todd Archer, beat report of ESPN. Said La'el Collins is among the players being released by the Cowboys today, according to a source. Collins, who started 71 games for the Cowboys from 2015 to 2021, joined the team in training camp and played in 3 preseason games. Coaches praised his work with young offensive linemen and defensive linemen. To me, it's interesting. I mean, Collins was never a realistic shot to make this team. I mean, I think we all understood that. He did a lot of good work working with younger players. The question to me is, does he come back as a practice squad guy to sort of work with those younger players more? The development there, it was kind of a weird situation, bring him back into the fold. Just bring back kind of a veteran guru to work with some younger guys. I mean, Collins' career is, while good with Dallas, not spectacular, but I think we can all agree it was a good run with Dallas. I think it was, at this point, he's at the end of his career. So the question is, what role do they have Collins having with this organization beyond today? I don't know. Maybe, I don't even know if it's worth a practice squad spot. Maybe bring him back as a sort of a coach role or something as he hangs up the pads for good. We'll have to see there, but that's the first significant shoe to drop in terms of roster moves for the Cowboys. Expect more over the coming days, of course. Some good news, though. This is per Dallas Cowboys public relations, so this is pretty official. Quarterback Trayvon Diggs passed his physical, moving him off the PUP, the physically unable to perform list, and onto the active roster. Now, does this mean he'll play week 1? No. What it does mean is that the Cowboys think he'll be ready to play early enough that they want to make sure that they will use him for weeks. They want to get him up to speed, have him go through practice and workouts, because if you're on the PUP list, you're constrained at what you can do with the team going through the process, right? You're going to be doing rehab group. You're not going to be practicing. You're not going to be going through walkthroughs, things like that. So the fact they moved him off the PUP list is a strong indication they believe he's going to be ready very early in the season. Maybe week 1, probably week 2, probably week 3, but that means he's taken up a roster spot. And that goes into the final point here on this report from Joseph Hoyt that he posted, I thought was very insightful. He said, one other ramification from the Trayvon Diggs news, Cowboys could be quicker to move Deron Bland to the slot. Outside cornerback Diggs, Kyer Elam, slot cornerback Bland. What does that mean for Keeman Hall, Zion Childress? And this kind of goes to the point I made before. It's if you have Elam and Diggs on the outside and Bland in the slot, which probably feels like the long-term solution, what do you want to have with these rest of these DBs, right? If like, that's going to be a real challenge for the Cowboys here. I mean, week 1, let's say Diggs doesn't play, right? So you have Bland on the outside, Elam on the outside, and now you got to focus on slots. That would be, say, Keeman Hall, Zion Childress. That would favor them. But if your long-term strategy and you've kind of leaned into that with activating Diggs off of the PUP list, is more like what we see on the screen here, then you want more Troy Pride Jr., right? Because you got Bland inside, and maybe you only keep one between Hall and Childress, right? So this becomes a challenging situation, and this is what the Cowboys are going to have to make a lot of really tough decisions on. Look, like I've said before, I think Troy Pride Jr. on the outside, Zion Childress in the nickel. I think until you start the season and maybe Keeman Hall makes the practice squad, I mean, there's a lot of tough situations to happen. The weird thing about the Cowboys cornerback room is that it's so decimated with injuries right now, with Kalen Carson, with Butler, with Trayvon Diggs, with Savone Revel, right? Is that it looks very bare, but in like a month, it's going to be really, really hard to find enough spots for people. Like there's going to be a lot of really good players on this roster at that position in a month. And that's one of the reasons why I've been saying, listen, September may be rough for Dallas, but I think later in the season, momentum's going to pick up and this team's going to get better and better as they get healthy at corner. All right, final report for the day. It doesn't have anything to do with Dallas, but I thought it was interesting. This is courtesy of Spot Track. There's an NFL trade. The Philadelphia Eagles acquired quarterback Sam Howell and a 6th-round pick, and they traded that to the Vikings, or they got that from the Vikings in return for a 5th and a 7th-round pick. The Vikings not liking Sam Howell to be their backup. The Eagles want him as their backup, ostensibly to trade maybe Tanner McPhee, a younger quarterback that's done some good things in the preseason. So essentially, when it's all said and done, the Eagles got a 6th-round pick and they lost in a 5th and a 7th. So their hope here is to maybe flip McPhee for maybe a 5th, and they basically will trade a 5th and a 7th to get a 5th and a 6th or something like that. And while this is a fine trade, it hasn't, it's okay. It doesn't really make any headlines. To me, this is one of the things that I think the Eagles, and I think Howie Roseman, their GM, does a generally good job overall. But there are GMs, and Roseman, I think, is one of them, that make moves just to make moves, right? They feel like they like jonesing, right? They gotta do something. This will have zero impact, right? Whether it's McPhee, Howell, or whoever's the backup quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, no impact on their long-term season prognosis, right? If Jalen Hurts misses most of the season, they're going to stink. Maybe 1 game, 2 games here or there, but they can work around like every team can. But if you miss a long time of your season, your veteran quarterback, your starting quarterback, you're going to stink. Everyone knows that. Everyone gets that. So moves like this, I'm sort of like, what are you getting here if you're Howie Roseman? Are you trying to just finagle out a deal where you get, you get a little bit of extra draft capital in the 5th round of one of these drafts? I mean, could it make a difference? Maybe. But considering the hit rate in 5th-round picks is like 10%, and the delta between an early 5th-round pick and a late 5th-round pick, if that's what you pick up in draft value, is sort of like a hit rate from 10.1% to 10%. I mean, you're doing all this time. I mean, this is taking a lot of time away from doing other things for that little incremental improvement. Doesn't seem very valuable to me. So I don't like GMs personally when they do deals just for deal's sake. And I think that's one of the things Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, that they used to do a lot more of. I'm glad they kind of backed away from that a little bit. I would like them to do a little bit better job in handling some of the bigger situations. Obviously, the Michael Parsons overhang still exists. But this is one of the things, even though Howie Roseman's a good GM and he gets a lot of praise, and deservedly so, this is one of the things he does all the time. He just does deals to make deals. I think this is what he likes to do, right? And if it works out great, people only focus on the good ones. But I think moves like this just sort of like, why? What are you trying to do here, right? It's kind of a weird deal to me. It's just doing moves just to make moves, just because he wanted something to do with his time. All right, let's get into the comments from yesterday. All right, like I always say on this channel, if you want to support us, become a member. There's going to be a link in the description box below. I'll try to pin a comment as well, because members, I will always answer your comments and answer them first. And if you're not a member, I'll do my best to get your comments, but no guarantees. And so we do have a member comment here from Mr. Robert Bass, 3667. Really appreciate it. New member. He commented, I just became a member. I ask your personal opinion. Do you believe the Cowboys will sign Parsons and he sees at least a few snaps game 1? Yes and yes. So I think one of the things that Micah Parsons has against him is that he has no leverage, right? He has none, right? This is, in my opinion, this is the Cowboys are in a transition year, right? This is my thought, right? This is sort of year 1 of the new regime. It's not going to be perfect. I've said this a bunch of times. Some people don't like it, but I feel like this year is going to be kind of middling for the Cowboys. And then next year, right, you have a younger linebacker core come together. They have a younger offensive line come together. You've got hopefully year 2 of Pickens, CeeDee Lamb, right? You've got Blue and Maffa coming together, right? We got Savone Revel with a whole healthy offseason, right? You have Ezra Raku year 2, right? And of course, you have a lot of the other big name stars that are still going to be on this football team. That this is is a team to me that 2026, 2027 is poised to be really, really good, in my opinion. 2025 kind of middling, right, as they kind of transition. So I think even though the Cowboys want Parsons, and they're a lot better with Parsons, if Parsons wants to sit out a game or two or something like that, it's not like the Cowboys, it's not like 1993, right, where they're a Super Bowl title contender. I don't think the Cowboys are, certainly not this season. So the Cowboys would theoretically be willing to wait a few games if Parsons were to hold out, and Parsons would lose out on, I think, $1.3 million per game. I mean, that's a big incentive. And remember, the Cowboys, and Jerry Jones has said this publicly, and everyone knows this is true, have his rights this season and potentially 2 seasons under the franchise, under the salary cap. If you average out his salary over those 3 seasons, that would be a significant discount. So the longer Parsons takes this going on, or how farther he takes this, and by Parsons I mean his agent David Mulugheta, the more likely that Parsons plays at a discount in his prime year. So he doesn't want to do that. Mulugheta doesn't want to do that. I think they're going to get a deal done. I think it's closer than people probably think. But depending on the snaps he plays week 1, I think I'd say that's a 90% chance he'll play week 1. I think it's a 100% chance he eventually signs with Dallas. I'll say 99.9. I'll give myself a little caveat there. But thank you for the comment, and thank you for being a member. Really appreciate it. This next comment is from Robbie Lavex here. I'd trade Tolbert or Schoonmaker for a DT, maybe add a pick as well if the player has a higher value. I agree. I think, he doesn't have to be a great defense. The problem is, like, who's going to give you a good defensive tackle, right? I mean, are you going to trade for, another Mazi Smith or something with a Tolbert or Schoonmaker trade? Probably. But I think you need to do something. I showed the data just a second ago. It's not good at defensive tackle for the Dallas Cowboys at that position, right? I think a trade makes sense. Bobby Demand commented, Mazi only got a 46 grade because of the tackle for loss when he wasn't even blocked. And remember, he's playing against 2s and 3s, not starters. I say cut him as the expected result. He's not good enough. Yeah, but it's one of those things when everyone is worse. And I agree, Mazi Smith is not good enough to be a starter. Should not be. But if everyone else is worse, that is pause for concern. And I will say this one thing about PFF, and this is, I don't know this for a fact, this is just sort of the rumor because they've got their proprietary formula. They don't exactly share exactly how they grade. If they look at sort of how you perform versus expected in some ways, this is sort of the theory. So, for example, if a receiver runs a route, it's a timing route, it's a post route, let's say, like the old Aikman to Irvin, like that bang eight kind of thing that he mentioned in the documentary. If the quarterback throws the ball and the corner's right on his hip and it hits the receiver in the chest, Michael Irvin in the chest, and he gets tackled right there, and it's good coverage and it's a first down, they'll give that quarterback a 95 grade. Let's just say that. Hey, great throw, good job, good timing, good accuracy, 95. But let's say the exact same throw, exact same accuracy, exact same everything, but the cornerback slipped and fell down, and the receiver now is wide open, right? The quarterback was the same level of accurate, hit him in the chest, same point, same timing, same everything. But this time the PFF will go, well, the DB fell down, so it's not as hard of a throw, only a 75. So the quarterback, same read, same throw, same everything. But because of what the defensive back did, it's a 20-point delta. Now, that's not literally how PFF works. No one really knows except for people that work there, their proprietary method for how they come up with this kind of stuff. But at least that's the rumor, and there's some evidence to support this. So Mazi Smith going unblocked in that situation, making a tackle for loss, doesn't really help out his grade that much because PFF will look at that and say, you should have made it. In fact, you made the tackle for loss, and there you go. You get a 65 grade on that play because no one blocked you. Good job, right? That's not uncommon for PFF, so keep that in mind. But I do think his grade overall, his performance in the preseason training camp has not been good. It certainly hasn't been starter worthy, not even close. But the Cowboys right now just don't have good enough starters at defensive tackle. So it's one of those things where if this was a legit championship team, I would say Mazi Smith does not make the roster, but they're not a legit championship team, my opinion, at least this season. I think he almost has to make the roster unless you think Perry and Winfrey or Toya is trending in the right direction and maybe bring in another veteran guy. I've said this before. I think Mazi Smith, the best role for him, at least if it would work out my vision this season, would play a lot of snaps, 15, 20 snaps, but not be the starter. Focus more on downs where it's not definite run, like maybe 2nd and 10, right? Maybe some 1st and 10s, stay off the 2nd and 2s, the 3rd and 2s, things like that. And if it's specifically run heavy, going to be a run play, that's a big liability for Dallas. So that would be my ideal plan for Mazi Smith, but we'll have to see how things shake out there. Delta 704 commented, I'm excited to see if you're right about Shamar James. I mean, the data supports it. The guy's been playing great. I'm a big fan. Excited to see what he does there. B. Will 2515, Mazi, Tolbert, Scooby, and Deuce are cut or trade guys. Obviously, we want trade value, but we also have some O-line guys leaving. I think Tolbert's an interesting guy for trade.
I know Mazi Smith to me is a cut candidate. I think I keep going back to who is going to be better than Mazi Smith on this roster at defensive tackle, and that is a scary question to ask, right? I think Perry and Winfrey actually had a pretty good preseason. I think Toye has shown some flashes, but who's like, are you going to go out of the frying pan into the fire here? It's a tough question there, but I agree. Tolbert maybe for a defensive tackle to solve that problem could make a lot of sense. Sparkle 618 commented a practice squad spot for Vaughn, even though he's always near the top on yards per carry. Yeah, but that's preseason though, right? We've seen him in the regular season, right? And that's sort of the thing. We haven't seen Maffa or Blue yet, or frankly even Williams or Sanders in Cowboys uniforms in the regular season. So you know what you get from Deuce Vaughn in the regular season, and it's not very good, but he can line up and actually play. I think that's a big question is, do you want to take a final 53-man spot just for a guy who, again, does well in the preseason but struggles in the regular season? I don't think so. I think practice squad, sort of a crisis player, if there's injuries at running back, makes a lot of sense. Stephen Vanover commented, chunk plays in Phil Maffa. He runs with violence I've not seen since Marion Barber III. I agree with your commentary and would love to find out what he would do with 15 plus reps a game. Chunk plays, that was Emmitt Smith's bread and butter. Jimmy Johnson, of course, one thing that attracted him so much to Smith was that in college, he led the nation with plays of 20 plus yards, i.e. chunk plays in today's jargon. Ground and pound has been missing for years. Go Cowboys. As always, love the content. Keep him coming. I tell you what, there's a lot of people really high on Phil Maffa. And, we showed the grades a second ago, and it was pretty better. It was actually better than I expected. Pretty good, excuse me. It was better than I expected. But we'll have to see. I mean, it's going to be very, very interesting. I think there's a reason, though, he was selected where he was, right? Let's keep that in mind. So it's not like, he's a second-round pick or a third-round pick, and everyone viewed him as that, and he just somehow fell to where he was selected in the 7th round, I believe. So there's a reason he fell to that point. Now, it doesn't mean he's not a good player, right? There's been 7th-round picks who are great players, right? Look at Jay Ratliff, defensive tackle from Auburn way back in the day, for example, about 20 years ago now. So that certainly can happen. I'm just a little, I'm a little hesitant. Let me say it like that. I want to see a little bit more. And I could be wrong, and I hope Maffa's a beast, but I want to see a little bit more from Phil Maffa. And maybe he has a big impact. Maybe he's, Marion Barber III 2.0, right, in terms of how hard he runs for this Cowboys offense. I'd hope that's the case. And look, some of the data I showed earlier, it does look pretty good for Maffa, so you guys may have a point there. This is courtesy of Brian-PX9GU. Mazi is just not a noteworthy DT in the NFL. He can't hold ground or anchor. He can't split a double team. His get off is slow, which means he can't shrink the line of scrimmage or play behind the heels of the line of scrimmage. I can see why they had him cut weight, because with all that, they tend to see if the lower weight could improve his get off, but didn't. They need to see if they can use him as trade bait, maybe a 5, 6, 7, and run away from him. There's always an NFL team that has need and think they can make a market work with first-round player. Run away from Mazi. If not tradable, cut him. Spots on the 53 are too important. Toye did well. He was able to shrink the line of scrimmage, play behind defenders' heels, and compress his gap. That is what you need from a nose tackle /1 technique. He needs to develop, but can be a workable interior defensive line. He made mistakes getting high, allowing himself to get washed, turn into a gap. But I think you have to limit having big guys shift at the last moment to a different gap technique and expect them to get set and get off the ball, get them in place, and get them to stop moving pre-snap. And that's a very good comment. I think the question is there, and you bring up a great point. If the Cowboys believe that Toye can develop quickly, then it makes sense, definitely, to move off of Mazi Smith, right? If you sit there and say, hey, Toye, he's trending in the right direction, right? He's down here now, but we think by the end of the season with a lot of playing time, he'll be up here. That makes sense. Okay, move off Mazi Smith, because Mazi Smith kind of is what he is at this point. But if you look at from a coaching staff perspective, Toye, and they say, he's a couple years away, right? And more playing time, playing 30, 40 snaps a game during the regular season, while I'll help him some, I think he needs more rep in practice or whatever it may be. If that's the case, then it's a different calculus. Maybe you keep Mazi Smith in that situation. But if you can, let me say this, if you can trade Mazi Smith and get like anything in return, you do it. Like, I don't care about the other positions. If someone's willing to give you a 5th rounder or a 6th rounder for Mazi Smith, do it. I would agree with that 100%. I just don't know who would be willing to do that. So I think that's a very good comment. And again, if Toye can develop and his trend is good, and I think he did some good things, the consistency is a problem there, then that is 100% agreement from me with you there. Play Toye, right? I think the question is, and this is what the Cowboys coaching staff knows because they've been in there in practice, is he developing? Is he getting better? Or is he just kind of flatlining where he is, right? If he's developing as a rookie, play him and let him develop, and let's work through the lumps of this season. If that's the case, I agree with you 100%. Let's see here. At Plague Doctor commented, if they cut Holden, he's going to be good somewhere else. He's not making a pass of wire. Mark that down. He's raw, but he's got the drive to be great. If they let Houston go, same thing. Been our best defensive lineman in the preseason so far. It's one of those things. The drive to be great, I can't speak for that. I don't know. I think he's got a good mentality. So Holden's been working hard. I don't know what's in his heart. I can't read his mind. I think he did show some flashes, but the problem is this is the NFL. Flashes don't get you wins, right? I mean, that's the reality of it, right? You need to be able to be a consistent performer, and you need to avoid the dumb penalties and catch the football, right? One of the things that makes the stars is that their flashes are there, but they're also consistently above average in everything else they do, right? CeeDee Lamb has the highlight catches and the flashes out of this world. That's awesome. But he's also a very reliable slot receiver. He converts third downs. He gets open. He's, does a lot of different things, for example, right? That's the difference, right? Even if it's not a superstar, even if it's just a Cooper Beebe, for example. Yeah, he has some really great blocks, but he's also very consistently solid with a lot of other blocks. He doesn't have a lot of disaster plays, right? And not that Holden had a lot of disaster plays, but he had some flashes and then a lot of meh. And that's one of those things. Is that worth a roster spot to say, man, he had one or two flashes, but there's a lot of meh mixed in? And I don't know, especially when you have a guy like Flournoy who just does well. So I think the question, again, it almost goes back to the Toya question. If the Cowboys coaching staff believes Holden can rapidly develop, that makes sense. Because Flournoy, even though he's a good player in terms of being a preseason bottom of the roster guy, you kind of know what he is at this point. He's spent a couple years with the program. If you think Holden has a lot more ceiling and a lot higher potential, he just needs 6 more months, a year more in the program, maybe that makes sense. But right now, I think that's a question the Cowboys coaching staff, they have to answer, because we just haven't seen it consistently enough from what we've seen when it comes to Holden. Last comment here. This is from Vince Sample, 2834. What's ridiculous is these people trying to make something of it, talking about the Micah Parsons contract situation. It's called a contract. It's called the CBA. Micah wants money that the team doesn't have to give him, and he wants more than the most. Jerry is doing exactly what he should be doing, and Micah is being greedy. Jerry doesn't have to break. Parsons told the fans he doesn't need 40. Now he wants more, and Jerry agreed. Jerry is not protecting the franchise and the cap because we want to keep Pickens after this year. He has leverage two franchise tag and a $50 million check up front that Parsons wants. Parsons should have signed by now, instead of allow his agent to try to stick the franchise up. Yeah, I think this is one of the things I will say is my bigger complaint with Micah Parsons, how he's handled this. And I agree with you, and I kind of mentioned the leverage earlier in this video, that Micah Parsons could have, whatever the resolution, could have done this before training camp, right? Could have done this a week, 2 or 3 weeks ago. There's going to be some resolution here. He could have said, listen, I'm not playing this season, I'm holding out, and he could have just left camp and not been on the sideline, stuff like that. He could have done that. If that's the resolution, then do that, right? If there's some agreement that's going to happen, which I think there will be, they could have done that much earlier. And that's on Micah Parsons, right? That is something he could have done by telling his agent. T. Higgins did that, for example, firing Mulligan to his agent. A lot of players do that. They sit there and say, no, I'm going to hold out, I'm not going to show up. And then eventually they say, all right, fine, I'm going to cave, or I'm not going to cave, I'm going to go home, right? But instead, he's kind of been in this middle ground here situation. This is where Micah Parsons needs to be. He said things on social media, but then he's there in person and stuff like that. I think he should have made a decision one way or the other. And I think he kind of tried to split the baby a little bit here, and it made it more dramatic than it needed to be. And look, the Cowboys have the leverage. Micah Parsons, he has two choices: either not play and basically go bankrupt by not getting his game checks, getting fined a lot of money, right? And then, because he's still got to pay his agent, so that money's not going to come in, and then sit out the season, right? And then his career's over, right? There's no one who's ever sat out a season in this situation and their career has come back even remotely close. So his two choices are lose out on, 10, 15 million bucks and end his career, or sign the deal that Jerry Jones has in front of him, or the third choice, play under his current contract and under 2 years of franchise tag for an aggregate discount. Those are his options, right? Those are his three. I don't think he likes the third option there. That seems to be punted to the side. So the two options, I think, in my opinion, that he personally thinks are viable is sign the deal that Jerry wants him to sign, or end his NFL career. I think the choice is pretty clear to me. All right, great comments as always, guys. Keep them coming. Really like to see what you guys say. Look, there's a lot of interesting things going to happen over the next 48, 72 hours. Going to release some players. Guys are going to go through waivers, practice squad. There's going to be a lot of sort of moving around here. But I think the point here is when we look at these Cowboys and look at the position they're in, when they cut guys and keep other guys, I think that'll tell you a lot about what they believe the developmental track of some of these players are. If they cut Mazi Smith, they think Toya's development is really good, for example. If they keep Trayshawn Holden, they think his development is really good, for example. So that's sort of the trend to look for. Don't look for, in my opinion, specific moves here or there and say, oh, they like this player over that player, or this position over that position. I think it's an indication that they want to see, because these are bottom of the roster guys, right? These are not, this is not like the starting quarterback, of course, or anything like that. So when they make a move one way or the other, I think it's an indication that they like the developmental track of that specific player, especially considering the Cowboys, my opinion, and I think they would probably agree with this too internally. This is not a championship or bust kind of season. They'll take it if they make a run, but they're trying to think, develop more long-term approach. And we've seen that this offseason, obviously working on Joe Milton's development, right? Implementing a new scheme, new coaching staff. So 2025, I think, is sort of a transition year as they look for 2026, 27, and 28 to be really good. And I think the moves that you see the Cowboys make, I think they're making moves to say, okay, in terms of guys to make the roster, who can develop to be big players for us in the future. So I think that's what we should all keep an eye on. But we'll have to see what all shakes out over the upcoming days as the Cowboys get ready for week 1 against Philly. Until next time, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.